Alright guys, hello, Calvin Sibley here with Leads to Closings, and in this video I am going to be going over how to get started wholesaling real estate. Now, wholesaling real estate, it's a popular way to enter the real estate investing industry without having to spend a whole lot of money up front. So the whole concept is finding a motivated seller who's willing to sell their property at below market value, getting that property under contract with the seller, and then finding a cash buyer, typically a local investor, who you can then assign the contract to or simultaneous close on it. Now, if you haven't watched our video on transactional funding, I'd recommend watching that video next, especially if you're learning about double closings and also known as simultaneous closings. So the important thing to understand with wholesaling is you really have to have a solid understanding of the contracts, right? It's almost like contract law, right? If you understand the terminology and definitions of the purchase agreements, you are way ahead of most people who are trying to get started wholesaling. So some of the key takeaways is understanding the legal aspects of wholesaling and why it's crucial for your success, researching your local market, or finding a virtual market, a remote market to work in, and then building a buyer's list in that market. Those are essential steps to get started, right? And then finding financing. If you're going to use transactional funding, lining up financing would be the third key takeaways. So understanding wholesaling real estate. So the definition of wholesaling is it's a real estate strategy where an individual who's known as a wholesaler enters into a contract, a purchase agreement with a property seller, and then assigns it or sells that property to a end buyer who's usually a local cash buyer, investor, right? But the wholesaler doesn't purchase the property and close on it and then own it for a period of time. Essentially, the wholesaler is acting as an intermediary or a middleman where they can buy the price, they can get a contract with the seller at a price that's below market value enough where they can sell it to a cash buyer for a price that's still below market value and makes sense for that investor, while also making a fee, making a profit on it. So some of the pros and cons of wholesaling, one of the main pros is low capital requirements, right? It doesn't take a lot of capital, a lot of money to get started. You're not having to close on properties, you don't need large down payments, you don't need a rehab cost, right? You can get started just by finding local people in your local market or in another market who have a real reason to sell their property. And you can go to leadstoclosings.com, create a free account if you haven't already, and browse motivated seller leads. You could literally be on the phone with a motivated seller today, this afternoon, or morning, wherever it is you're watching, whenever it is, if you buy a lead from us. So another pro is that there is a quick turnaround time. You get a property under contract, you find a buyer, typically it can close within 30 days. So you're talking about making $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 within 30 days. And with very limited knowledge, it doesn't take a lot of knowledge to get started. I suggest checking out my course, Closings Mastery. You can go to closingsmastery.com, and that is a great way to get started. If you just watch the trainings on there, I actually give you the contracts you can use, and I actually explain to you how you can get them under contract without even having to meet with the seller. Some of the cons are, limited profit potential. You're not rehabbing the property, so assignment fees may be smaller. But for you, it could still be life-changing money to add an additional, even $5,000, $10,000 a month can be a lot for people. And then there are also, some legal risks. As long as you understand the purchase agreement, you do right by people, you're doing right by people, you're doing what you say you're going to do. you should be fine. Now, I'm not an attorney and this is not legal advice, but understanding the contracts and the legal aspects is super important, which brings us to the next segment, which are the legal aspects of wholesaling. So, as I mentioned, wholesaling can be a lucrative business, but it is essential to understand the legal aspects of wholesaling before you get started. So we're going to go over some of the licensing requirements and some of the legal documents that are needed to make sure that you are operating within the law. So generally, wholesalers can operate without a real estate license. However, laws vary state by state, especially I can think of Oklahoma and Illinois. If you are wholesaling in those states, you want to research the laws. We don't have time to get into all the laws of each state, but some states may require wholesalers to have a license. So you definitely want to look at the license requirements of your state and make sure you are within the legal, you're operating legally, right, in your state. And you also still must adhere to state and federal laws that are governing real estate transactions. Even if you're not licensed, it's also just a good business practice, right? For example, disclosing what you know to a buyer about a property that you are selling to them. It's just a good idea, and it also may be legally required for you in your state. So another legal aspect, I mentioned the contracts, the purchase contract, right? And the assignment of contract. You need to have a purchase agreement. You need to have an assignment of contract, right? The purchase contract or purchase agreement is a legally binding contract between the buyer and seller that outlines the terms of the sale, right? The price and terms. And as a wholesaler, you're going to use that property to secure, or the purchase agreement, you use the purchase agreement to secure the property and then be able to market that to your end buyers. Right? It's also known as an equitable interest. You have an interest in the property, that's what you're marketing for sale, which is why you can do this without a real estate license, because you're not listing the home for sale, you are marketing a property that you legally have the right to assign to a buyer. Then you also need the assignment agreement, right? You need an assignment of contract, which you will use when you're working with buyers. Let's say you get a property for $20,000, you have an investor, you're under contract for $20,000, the investor will pay you $25,000. How do you get paid? What do you need to legally assign that contract to a buyer? Well, you need an assignment of contract. And then, the closing documents. You don't really need to have those to get started. The title company will prepare them for you or for your buyer and seller at the closing, but it's a good idea to be able to read them and understand them and know what it is that they're preparing. For example, the HUD-1, the settlement statement, being able to read that. So it is a good idea to get a real estate license just because of the knowledge that you get, and part of that pre-licensing course will teach you about some of those closing documents. So these steps to get started, right? Wholesaling is a great way to get started with real estate investing. As I mentioned, there's very little risk, very little money required, and I definitely recommend wholesaling at least 5 or 10 houses before you go to do a rehab or maybe even buy and hold. But the first step would be market research, right? You need to know about your local market, or if you're working in another market. So for example, current trends, are prices going up? Are they going down? What are the average prices in your area? What areas are in high demand by real estate investors? Where are investors looking to buy? And then building a network of those investors, right? Building a network of contacts is crucial in this business, which could be real estate agents, investors, other wholesalers, title companies, going to real estate investor association meetings and meeting people in your community, attorneys, real estate attorneys, right? Building out that network, building a buyer's list, building a cash buyer's list, communicating with them is the second step, right? So researching your market, building your network, and then finding potential opportunities, right? Finding potential properties Once you have that market knowledge and a network, then go out and find some potential properties. You can do this by searching online, driving around your neighborhood, knocking on doors, but we have made it super simple for you with Leads to Closings, where you can go in, create an account, set your geographic area, what's your criteria, where are you looking to buy, and then you can see leads that you can buy and then call those sellers right away. And then once you have a seller on the phone, negotiating with the seller would be the third step, right? You need to understand about the contract, the price, the sales terms, and all of those relevant details. And I go over a lot of that in Closings Mastery, so check that out. But make sure your contract is legally binding. Make sure you can have an attorney review it, and make sure you understand how to get the seller to sign it, which, as I mentioned, I go over all of that in detail in Closings Mastery. Then once you have a contract with a seller, going out and finding buyers, right? You need to go out and sell that property typically within a week or two. So you need to contact investors and agents and wholesalers with the goal of finding a buyer who's willing to purchase the property quickly and for a fair price, right? Fair to you. So following these steps, right? Determine your market, understand the contracts, build a network, build a buyer's list, start getting on the phone with motivated sellers or meeting them in person, and you are well on your way to your first or next deal. And lastly, some strategies for success, right? Wholesaling requires some planning and it requires some execution. I see a lot of people get stuck in kind of that planning phase. They call it kind of paralysis by analysis, and they never do a deal. But you want to be planning, right? Have an effective marketing strategy, right? Where you're going out not only for sellers, but for buyers, right? Where you're going out, you're finding sellers. Maybe you're budgeting, okay, I'm going to put $1,000 a month into motivated seller leads. I'm going to be able to, buy this many leads per month. And now I'm going to be able to convert, hopefully, one out of every so many leads into a closed transaction, right? So you definitely want to budget for the future. How much are you going to be marketing for sellers and buyers? But you can also do things like creating an online presence, right? You can create a Facebook page for free. You can create a professional website through Carrot.com, for example. I think it's $97 a month, $100 a month, and you can get this beautiful converting website, highly converting website that gives you some credibility. You can tell sellers that, hey, I've got this website. You can see my, my information on there. And then, setting up some mailing campaigns, some cold calling campaigns, right? Advertising, in your local area and networking with sellers that way. There's a ton of different ways to build your business kind of footprint. But starting with some online listings like a website and a Facebook page, which don't cost a lot of money, are crucial. And then some other kind of best practices, right? You definitely want to be honest with buyers and sellers. You want to tell buyers about the condition of the property. If there's something if it needs a new roof, it needs a foundation, disclose that, right? Disclose that to the buyers. And then also disclosing, if there's potentially any conflict of interest, if the property may be in probate, and that it's going to take 6 months until the seller can close on it. Well, you don't want to tell the buyer, hey, we can close next week, right? You don't want to avoid any false or any misleading statements like that. And that's really how you build a reputation, right? You definitely want to do what you say you're going to do, be honest, be transparent. And also going back to the legal aspects, just making sure you're in compliance with any local or federal laws, right? And just understanding what those are. So wholesaling has come a long way. We've started over 10 years ago. The industry is continuing to develop and kind of evolve and become more efficient. There's a lot more software. There's a lot more technology, AI, which has made our job much easier, right? Things like Google Street View, Google Maps Street View didn't exist when I started, or DocuSign, right? We used to mail contracts to people, but staying on top of those industry changes is important, right? I recommend reading publications. It could be online publications, online forums like Bigger Pockets or networking groups, and then just constantly monitoring your own market and knowing, where are the growth opportunities. Maybe there's a new factory going in part of your town, a new car manufacturer is coming in there, and so that, okay, this area is going to go up in value, real estate values, right? Because there will be more jobs in that area and people will be able to afford to live there. They'll want to live there. So look, wholesaling it can be a very lucrative venture for the people who are willing to work, who are willing to put in the work and develop the skills that are necessary, right? Especially for beginners, I highly recommend wholesaling as the way to go to get started. You can start making cash quickly and efficiently, and you just have to understand the process, right? You have to understand, the basics of the purchase agreement, how to find buyers, how to find motivated sellers, how to negotiate deals, and as I mentioned, build a network of buyers who will come back to you and buy from you over and over again, and also stay on top of, real estate trends and what's going on in the market. So there are some risks, as I mentioned, but overall, the potential is there. I mean, yes, some deals will fall through, some properties will have title issues, but for people who are dedicated and persistent, they can definitely make it. I just made make the decision, right? I am going to stick with this until I am successful, right? And tell that to yourself, tell that to your spouse, tell that to your cat, whoever. But make the commitment that you will stick with it until you are successful, right? Either you win, either you're successful, or, that's it. There is no backup plan, right? Like, you are going to be successful. You make that decision, and then everything else kind of falls into place. So I hope this video was helpful, kind of as an overview of getting started. And we have made hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars wholesaling, and being able to control your time is a huge plus. You can work from home, you can work remotely, you can do this as a side project, but it all goes back to finding motivated sellers. That's why I recommend leadstoclosings.com, which we set up to help investors who don't want to deal with direct mail and door knocking and cold calling and pay-per-click and text messaging, if that's even legal anymore. And the TCPA guidelines, it's tough for a lot of these marketing channels. But leadstoclosings.com, just go online, you can create a free account, browse leads in your area. There's no commitment to buy, there's no upfront costs, no commitments at all. You can just see what leads are in your area. And please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more real estate investing content, and I will see you on the next video.